Welcome, everybody. We're at the NASCC 2025 conference out here in Louisville, Kentucky. And at this time, Atlas Tube is introducing the Atlas Connections Hub, first of its kind in the industry to support engineers in their endeavor to use HSS and make the connection process easier. So I'm here with Ted Goldstein, one of our teammates that handles all the Q&A that comes from engineers as they design structures and have questions about connections. Also the inventor of the Shuriken, another great connection tool. So we're here to talk about the Connections Hub. And we'll just start with a really simple question. So I've been working with Atlas for a long time in the industry on agency side and now as in my current role. And the one thing that I always heard from engineers is HSS connections are a challenge. Like, what kind of drove the impetus to look at a tool like this?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, one of the complaints that we do hear about why HSS isn't used really as often as it probably should be is that the connections are difficult. And some of that, in certain situations, there's some truth to it.
Yes.
In a lot of situations, it's not so much difficulty as unfamiliarity. So, we've heard this enough times. We eventually got to the point where we figured, well, we might as well just go ahead and produce our own tool, not only to allow people to design the connections and get an answer, get a design for a specific project, but to do it in a way where they're also going to get an education and become more familiar with how that particular connection works, what the checks are, and really, kind of demystify it and show people that it's really not as hard as it's often made out to be.
Right. And we've taken the first step on a lot of these designs because we've given them templates. We're starting out with 20 templates that are on the Connections Hub for the calculators, and then 37 that are typical details that our team has put together. And that's kind of a good start for an engineer to start experiencing the tool and understand how it may support them in their job. I'm curious, when you talked to a few people already yesterday and today, what's been the quick reception to the software?
I mean, people seem to really like it as a tool. Certainly it's replacing what would traditionally be done probably by a spreadsheet because, a lot of these connections are not really well supported by a lot of paid software suites. So not only is it saving an engineer the time to make that spreadsheet, but it's also saving the time to do the quality checks to make sure the spreadsheet works the way you want it to. And that's really where the time goes. So just as a productivity tool, huge benefit, and we're seeing a great response in that sense. But I think the biggest surprise to a lot of people is they see it, they think that's great, and they ask what does it cost, and the answer is nothing, right? So we're a tube company. We're interested in making it easier to use the product, and so of course we want to make sure that everyone gets to use the software to do that.
It's interesting because you had mentioned earlier that a lot of engineers are not familiar with doing connection design for HSS. Is that something that's related to education or just industry-wide? What drives that?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we've been using wide flanges or even before there was a wide flange as we know it today. We were bolting angles to plates to make I-shaped members back 120 years. And so, that has been the general method that people have used for a long time. It's how engineers learn to do connections in college. And, just in the sense that really engineering is something you get most of your education on the job. And to the extent that HSS isn't used as often, it means people have less experience with it. And so that kind of drives the intimidating aspect of doing a new connection type for the first time. So just trying to kind of undo that cycle and get people more familiar with it.
Yeah, it's a process, right?
Yeah,
it's
going to take some time, but I think this is a good first step.
Great first step. I think out of the gate, with the number of connections that we're making available on both tools, the details as well as the calculators, it really allows that engineer to experience, whether it's a moment connection or a trust connection, to get in there and understand how the tool works, number one. And number two, everything they do it's saved, right? So they can leverage that work for the future or adopt it right into their library.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that, how they might use this tool beyond just for a specific project.
Yeah. I mean, one of the nice things, as you say, you can save the work. You can duplicate connections. So if you have a building that has 10 different beam sizes, and you need to calculate all those connections, you can just go ahead, do one, duplicate it, change a few things around, and then along with that, along with the actual production, there's also a really great reporting function so that we can generate reports, document those connections, which I think is going to get used a lot, especially by engineers who specialize in connection design.
Yeah. So it's really adding value for not only from conceptual design all the way through to fabrication, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, depending on the part of the country you're in, some engineers of record will actually do the connection design. Some will delegate that to a connection engineer later in the process. But even for the engineers who are delegating the design, there are times you have to check things. And so we want to make sure they have the tools to do that.
Yeah. And I know that not being an engineer, I know when I've looked at the tool, you can actually go in and look at how the calc was done behind the scenes just to verify that the math as an engineer, but just to verify the tool is working correctly.
Yeah, that's one of the big things I think, you can certainly, obviously, you have all the inputs, you have the summary of what your results are, but you also have access to every step along the way. And with each step, there's an explanation, you get the formula, and crucially, you get the code reference. So if anyone is, looking at this for the first time, they know exactly where to look in their steel manual to be able to get the background on what you're checking and what that limit state really is about.
So it should make them feel confident about the result that they put in, right? Based on the inputs they put in, they should have confidence in that result that came out.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's one of the reasons why, so we developed this in partnership with a company called Clear Calcs, right? And their business is structural calculators. So they have the experience not only to produce, something that's very smooth and functional, but also they have the established quality control procedures so that we know the math was right. Because as I said before, right, checking the spreadsheet is the hardest part, making sure it works. So with that, we have the confidence that that these are giving the right answer.
For sure. Because you got to have confidence in the connection, because that's what holds the whole building together, right?
Yes, indeed.
I've heard someone say before. I'm curious in terms of what we've heard in just various outings that I've been with and talking to fabricators and engineers. There's just a lot of back and forth, sometimes late in the process, about the design and maybe even specific about connections.
Mm-hmm.
You come from that world, so I wonder if you could talk about that a little bit and how this tool may help alleviate some of that back end change.
Yeah, so I think, part of the fact that HSS connections are a little, people don't deal with them as much. Some engineers may not have as much experience there. Means that there are a lot of cases where you see people kind of reinventing the wheel, and naturally, often you're going to end up with stuff that is less efficient to build, for the fabricator. And so often the fabricator will have to, go back to the engineer, propose alternates. Sometimes they get accepted, sometimes they don't. But even if they do, that's an administrative process. They have to submit an RFI. You have to get, responses and that sort of thing. It's much easier to get the efficient detail on there in the beginning. And so that's why a part of this is, certainly the calculators, but then there's also the typical detail aspect of it. We have starting with 4 sheets of typical details covering beam column connections. We just want to make sure that the engineers have that material, and we have it out there both PDF and in CAD formats so they can copy and paste it into their drawings. But these are all details that we know are, simple to fabricate. They're not going to cause a lot of changes once the project's already out, past the bid stage. So again, just trying to make sure that the process is smooth and that you get the most efficient detail.
Yeah. So what's next? I know from a backlog, we're going to continue to invest in the software. We're going to continue to invest in the connection details so that, I will say almost any connection an engineer wants to dream up, they can use our calculators and details with, but they'll have a really good starting base for almost nearly anything they want to do, except for highly customized connections.
Yeah.
What would you describe some of the connections that might be coming down the road?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now, the starting place was beam to column connections. There are about 20 of those. And from there, we'll do braces, base plates, splices, and truss connections, TYK. which is, chapter K in the manual. And yeah, that's kind of the plan at the moment. But one thing that's really important is we want to get feedback from the users. And so there is actually, I think one of the great things about this is it has a really easy help function, feedback function, where you can just, click on send us a message. And, we want to know what are the connections that people use on a frequent basis that they want us to include. Because again, the whole point is to make it easy for them. So we want to be responsive to what's going to be helpful.
Right. And speaking about support, there's two different layers to support. There's one, if you have app support, you click on that, you'll get immediate support on, if you're in the middle of a calculation, not figuring out the app itself, you can get some support via chat with the company. But the other one, to your point, is if you have a specific question on a connection, our team Atlas 2 will be there to help you. Our engineering experts will be there to help you.
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
We're there to make it easy.
Yeah.
So I'm curious if there's anything else we want to talk about here. I know just a couple of my conversations, there seems to be an initial drive just to play with it. And what would you recommend to an engineer? Like, what's the best way to start with something? Like, take an old project out and see, like, what would you recommend to someone to get started with this?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I think, like you said, kind of play with it. Maybe to a certain extent is, what are the typical details used now? What are the typical connections used now? If they're in here, go ahead and run some just to, see what the results are. And if they're not in here, there's a good chance that the ones we do have may offer a more efficient way of achieving that same connection.
Good advice. Good advice. All right. I don't think I have any other questions, Ted, but this has been very educational for me as a marketing guy. So I appreciate you sharing your insights.
Well, we want it to be educational for everyone. So appreciate it, Rick.
Signing off, everybody.